Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alex Cron. I am Terentia's community manager. I'm excited to be hosting our first series of community conversations in my work with Terentia. Today's webinar kicks off our series on AI. Where we will discuss AI and how this technology is shaping the future of museums and cultural institutions. If we could go to the next slide. Thank you, Lauren. AI is transforming industries, and museums are no exception. We're thrilled to have such a diverse group of professionals here with us today. Your engagement and curiosity drive innovation in our field, and we're excited to share today's conversation with you. We will have a couple of polls amongst our presentations and open discussion, so please be on the lookout for those. We will start with a quick introduction of AI concepts and why they matter. Then we'll explore real-world applications of AI and how AI can improve efficiency and productivity in museum operations. We'll wrap up with an open Q&A session, but please feel free to put any questions that you have in the Q&A or the chat throughout the webinar. We will, try to respond to those as they're relevant to the topics. Our next webinar is on January 22nd. Next slide, please, Lauren. Oh, sorry, not that one. Thank you. Our next webinar will be on January 22nd, and we'll emphasize ethics and data privacy. And our last webinar of the series will be January 29th, which will take us outside of the GLAM sector. At the end of this series, we will have a roadmap available for organizations to take away with actionable steps in integrating AI in their operations while maintaining alignment with their mission and values. Now, a little bit more about Terentia. For those who are new to us, Terentia is a next-generation platform designed to meet the unique digital asset and collections management needs of museums, libraries, archives, and other cultural heritage institutions. Terentia's cloud-native platform is based on 4 key pillars: tools designed and integrated to help organizations with their everyday activities, including manage, discover, engage, and trade. These pillars enable our community to manage their collections and organize and preserve assets, leading to the ability to tell compelling stories. This webinar represents Terentia's ongoing technology and educational mission to bring collections management and DAM out of the basement, break down the traditional silos between these systems, and make managing and sharing your collections information easier and more impactful. Now, before we dive in, let me introduce our fabulous speakers. We have Devine, former Director of Libraries and Museums Strategy at Microsoft. Catherine is a retired technology leader and enthusiast who worked at Microsoft for many years, focusing on the libraries and museums sector. She developed and delivered global solutions and strategies that helped libraries and museums achieve their goals in the digital era. She also authored the Microsoft Libraries and Museums Digital Transformation Framework, a comprehensive guide for library and museum leaders to navigate the digital transformation across different areas such as visitor attraction, experience, research, community service, operations, fundraising, and emerging technologies. Prior to Microsoft, Catherine was the Chief Digital Officer at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City for 7 years, where she led its digital transformation. She's passionate about technology and its potential to improve outcomes for individuals, organizations, and society. Next, we have Nick Honeysett, Director and CEO of Balboa Park Online Collaborative, a San Diego-based nonprofit consultancy that provides business and digital strategy consulting and information technology support and development services for the cultural sector. Previously, he was head of administration for the Getty Museum. He is a former board member of the American Alliance of Museums and the current board chair for the Institute of Learning Innovation. He's a frequent speaker on a range of technical, business, digital, and strategy opportunities and challenges facing the cultural sector. His hobbies include writing short summary paragraphs about his career and referring to himself in the third person. Now, last and certainly not least is Neal Bilow, Terentia CEO. With over 20 years of dam industry experience, Neal is known for his leadership and ability to translate strategic, organizational, and business goals into technology solutions that work. Marrying these skills with a passion for cultural institutions, Neal brings his expertise in dam and related technology to empower the GLAM sector to be its very best. This is what drives Terentia, a motivation to build a thriving community where knowledge and best practices are shared. Along with leading Terentia, Neal's the founder and managing partner of Chromata Solutions, a leading consultancy in dam and content supply chain. Now, before I turn it over to Catherine, we wanted to do a short poll from attendees to get an idea of what you think AI is. And so I'm going to go ahead and launch that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and just give you a minute to respond to the poll, and then I'll show the results. I love this. All right, I'm going to end the poll just here in a second. We got almost everybody participating. Fabulous. So I'm going to just go ahead and share the results real quick, just so everybody can see that. Excellent. Thank you everyone for participating. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Catherine. Catherine's going to guide us through a quick overview of AI, starting with its current landscape and potential. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Welcome, everybody. Great to be here. As someone who has been retired for about a year, it's challenging well, interesting and exciting to go back to the past. I wanted to just take 5 minutes and just start before we talk about AI for the next 3 weeks with just some grounding in the concepts behind how it works, which is based on mathematics. The reason I want to do that is because I think it's really helpful to understand. I think for many people, it may appear like magic. I'm sure many people are grounded in it, but for some, maybe you're not. And it may appear like magic. And I think it's helpful to actually understand how it works, to understand its opportunities, to understand its limitations, to understand where it can go both right and wrong, and how it can therefore make informed decisions about applying it to applications in your organization. So I think the first thing I wanted to sort of really comment on is it's very easy when a new technology emerges, and we've seen this many times across mobile, web, internet, going back to mainframes, etc., to just focus on the very first instantiation of the technology as being the only opportunity and also representing the global world of that technology. And I think in the case of AI, it's very easy to fall into its ChatGPT and its various variations. And I think the other one is its image generation. So how can I create an image that doesn't actually really exist from a whole bunch of data? Because I think that they're the consumer facing experiences that has been discussed at length in the media and that we've been exposed to. But I really want to, AI has been around for a long time, and it's so much more. The thing that makes AI now and irrelevant now and not in the past is that we now have the compute technology, the compute power and the data that allows us to rapidly develop models and then apply those models to applications. And so therefore I was sort of, it's mathematics at scale. It's recognizing patterns and creating predictions in a model and then applying that model in lots of different ways. So I want to give you an example that hopefully is something that represents something that may be familiar to you. It's incredibly reductionist, but hopefully it is helpful to understanding how this works. So we can go to the next slide, please. So You will remember, hopefully from school, algebra, linear regression, or any regression for that matter. And, a very familiar, y equals mx plus b. Let me explain what that is for those who've been a while since they were in school like me. Y is about predicting a value based on so you take a set of data, variables, and you can create a straight line, regression line, usually straight, but not always, in its very simplest form, that predicts a value of Y based on some data. So in this particular case, if I wanted to predict salary and I used age as a variable, I could come up with a formula based on a set of data, of actual data, that said that based on being a certain age, you could reasonably expect a certain salary. Now, this straight line regression, if you remember from school, is about coming up with a straight line that is the least amount of error based on the past and allows you to predict a value in the future. But of course, we know that there is so much more. This is very simple. There's so much more to predicting salary than just your age. It's clearly potentially many, many other variables. Some are known, some we can come up with as humans, and some are unknown. And so what we're really doing with training models is taking this and then scaling it extensively. So imagine if I had 1,000 variables. Imagine if I didn't know all the possible variables that influence salary. Imagine I had a huge amount of unstructured data, and I allowed it to crunch through that data to actually find variables that you may expect and that may be unexpected. And it doesn't know what the weighting is of each individual variable. It actually has to calculate it. And as it calculates it, it finds out which is the one that has the least amount of error. And then it backtracks. And then it learns from that. And then it does it again. And ultimately, at the end, you end up with a model that we can now compute in a matter of minutes. Instead, if you tried to calculate this yourself, you could technically do it with 1,000 variables. But if you did it, you'd be at this for months. And you'd be also going crazy, right? So this is the thing that makes it transformative. So I just wanted to start there because, as you can see, it's a function of data. It's a function of compute power. It's a function of, how comprehensive that data is and how realistic that data is. And then it's also a function of, does the past predict the future? So I'm going to stop there, but I just wanted to be incredibly reductionist, but just explain how this works. And then you take these models and then you apply them. So I'll let you move on, Alex.
Thank you, Catherine, for that excellent overview. Before we dive into use cases, we would like to do another short poll on what areas of museum operations you think would benefit most from AI. Let me go ahead and launch that.
While you're doing that, I'm just thinking, I don't think my shark calculator is able to do those kind of mathematical equations, Catherine. I'm gonna have to upgrade.
Well, it's the same as calculators. Calculators gave you scale, right? Calculators
Absolutely.
allowed you to do more calculations, but this is just on steroids.
That's
And then we all thought we were going to get 100% in our maths test because we have
Yeah.
calculators with us.
that's exactly.
Yeah, that didn't happen.
Well, I remember when our teachers used to tell us, "You won't have a calculator always on your pocket, would you?" And now look at us with our.
Well, now
Look
look
at
at
us
our
now.
phones.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
We have computers in our pockets. That's great. I'm going to give people just another minute to respond to the poll before I end.
That last poll engagement was great. There's some really interesting things that I'd love to come back to that at the end.
Yes, Mike, I'm sorry we didn't do a multi-select option. There are definitely lots of opportunities for AI to advance our missions. And I do apologize. It seems that our chat is not working. I am sorry for that. Please, feel free to message the panelists and myself if anything, if you need any help with our assistance. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. I think we've. Oh, and please do feel free if there are. Oh, thank you, Jean-Luc. Please feel free if you feel like there is a response that is not on the poll, please contribute to the chat as well. We would love to capture that information. So I'm going to share the results here. This is fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for contributing.
This is a good one. Look at this. Really great results too.
All right.
I love how only 9% is undecided. That's good. So we're getting there.
For sure. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Now we're going to go ahead and look at how AI is applied in museums today. Nick, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you to start us off. So if you could share some, examples of how museums are using AI to enhance curation, accessibility, and visitor experience.
Thanks, Alex. And good morning from sunny California, San Diego. So I thought I'd start off by kind of categorizing some of the examples you're going to see. And really, I think this represents maybe a maturity of bringing in AI, large language models into your organization. So there's three categories. So the kind of foundational one is AI informed. It's kind of an entry level use. I'm going to give some examples. Mostly that's about analysis and helping using AI to understand a set of data. And like Catherine said, it's the basis of these large language models and these interactions and these engines is mathematical. So it's very good at that. Kind of in the intermediate level is a kind of a supported interaction with AI. So tools that are assisting staff in a kind of a more of a transactional and a conversational manner. Okay, I will deal with that large language model issue. And then the kind of most advanced and most mature is AI driven, where kind of AI is kind of operating on its own. It doesn't have much human interaction with it. So a large language model is really what these AI engines like ChatGPT, like Gemini, like Copilot, they are based on a large set of data. So a language set of data. And that's really what the kind of technical term. So if you see the acronym LLM stands for large language model, and that's really what those AI engines are. So Lauren, next slide. Thank you very much. So here's some examples of these three kind of categories. AI informed, it's about identifying, and the poll demonstrated a perception that this is applicable across all operations and programming in museums. So identifying, it's really good at this. Identifying gaps in collections, it's great at analyzing visitor trends. I have an example. Image analysis, we're mostly talking about ChatGPT, but and I'm sure many of you are working with ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini. But also each of these are increasingly bringing image recognition into the mix as part of our interaction with AI. So conservation, image manipulation, these are things that can be analyzed through AI, and mapping connections from your collection to maybe your archive data or even other collections, do a comparison. Again, large scale information. AI supported is this kind of conversational, more interactive interaction with AI. So helping you draft documents, maybe artist bios, wall labels, loan letters, grant applications. On grant applications, there are even services now that have an AI engine behind that are specifically designed to help you write grants. Grantable is probably, as an example, is probably one of the most used. Creating tailored emails, suggesting metadata, and you've kind of got this conversational going. So on the left-hand side, you're being informed, you're using AI to inform you about a set of data, and then you act on it. At this middle level, you're having a dialogue and an interaction. So it's doing a draft, you're correcting it, you're giving it feedback, and you're kind of working together, kind of human and machine, to create something. And then on the AI-driven side, that is when you kind of unleash AI to the general public, which is somewhat scary. So virtual docent applications, I have some examples of those, interactive or educational interactions, and semantic or natural language collection discovery. If you could go to the next slide, let's give some examples of these. I always like to see kind of under the hood. So many of you may be interacting with the website ChatGPT, uploading information and querying it, or Gemini similarly in Copilot. But if you want to kind of get a little bit of a peek under the hood, there are functions that you can embed into Google Sheets, Excel, Word, Google Docs. And these are a set of functions that actually kind of tailor an interaction with AI. So on the data analysis side, you can see here's the function that you put in a cell. You give it a reference and you ask it to do something. So here, this is an example of some sentiment analysis based on a very large visitor survey, which is trying to determine a sentiment towards the institution, but also the question was around membership benefits. And so it's doing an analysis and pulling out specific examples of what is being cited as a benefit for membership. Next slide, please, Lauren. Here's a great example from the Royal Navy Museum, shamelessly promoting one of our webinars, actually, that Alex hosted and moderated by the Royal Navy Museum around image recognition. And this gives you an insight into the scale that is available. So the Royal Navy Museum had a collection from an amateur photographer of warships, military ships entering and leaving Plymouth Harbor, taken over a couple of decades. A significant number of images that were working with a local university college and their computational department to analyze and categorize all those photographs. The AI engine, this is typically how it works, is trained, and you can see these Jane's military manuals provided the training material, and then the analysis was carried out to categorize those military ships, warships. And I believe within a few months, maybe 3 months, they were able to kind of categorize with a high degree of accuracy about 2 million photographs, if I remember that correctly, based on image recognition, pattern matching again, which is part of that. Nope, you were right to do that, Lauren, go ahead. Here's kind of in this middle tier, AI supported. There was a comment saying that interpretation was missing. Here's a spreadsheet. Again, it's using functions within Google Sheets. Shout out to Bruce Wyman, who originated this spreadsheet. So what you're seeing here is in the first 3 columns, you've got an object title, you've got a link to the web page, and you've got a link to the image of the collection object. AI is being used to create a short alt text for it, a long alt text, and then a description based on image recognition. And then you can go in and create some translation. So you can do this call to ChatGPT, translate it to any one of well over 100 languages, I believe. Again, this is an interaction, so this is not meant to be, okay, we just do it and we put it in front of the audience. It's part of a kind of interaction to refine what's coming back. Next slide, please, Lauren. So on the driven side, so this is when you're kind of unleashing AI to the public. So you don't have control over what it's going to say, and we do know that AI. These engines, these large language models do hallucinate. You can constrain the hallucination to some point by having very robust and detailed prompt engineering, which is how you interact with an engine. But there's 2 examples here. On the left is certainly with ChatGPT, you can create what are called GPTs, which are specific contained interactions with ChatGPT. This one is an example from a guy, Paul Fishwick, and it's a simple tool, which is you ask it a question and it comes back with 3 kind of educational levels of response. So it's got a child, a teen, a college student, a graduate student, and an expert. And so you can tell from this, it is very easy to set up, that you can create this kind of interpretive, explanatory, educational dialogue on any topic. A specific example in the museum world from Ask Mona, agency out of Paris, France. And they have an application which they're in the museum world. They have this application which is a dialogue and interaction with AI. It's based on, you can see in this the little image, there's a kind of a badge. That badge has a QR code on the back of it. You scan the QR code, and then this one in particular is Cleopatra, and then you enter into this conversation through natural language with Cleopatra. And they have, I kind of like that kind of, there's a merchandise component in that as well. You kind of pay for the badge, and then you download the application. So that's a great example, I think, one of the best out there of this kind of AI-driven in autonomous interaction, creating a kind of educational interpretive experience with works of art. And the last one, a great example from the National Museum of Norway, Tord Nilsen. This is a beta site, but now I think they've implemented it on their collections website. And this is a semantic interaction with a collection. What that means is you query the so rather than just a search box, which has to match tags and title and text, you can construct kind of natural language queries. The example here is a person expressing anxiety or fear, and it's through image recognition and through analysis of the descriptive text, it's going to return to you a result set. There's no guardrails. There's anything you can think of, you can ask this question of the collection, and it's going to return a set of results. So I highly recommend going to the National Museum of Norway's website and checking that out. And I think this kind of stuff, I think, is definitely coming as a way of providing greater discoverability and accessibility for collections.
Thank you, Nick. Before I hand it off over to Catherine, there is a question in the chat that I wanted to ask you first before moving on. Nicola asked, which AI tool was used for the alt text?
For the alt text, I'm pretty certain it's using DALL-E. I will confirm that.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Catherine, now over to you for a deeper dive.
Great, thanks. I wanted to talk about, this is an example from that Microsoft did, but don't let that sway you. I just thought it was a great example, and it's one that I use a lot when I was at Microsoft to help explain where some of the possibilities are. One of the great things about AI is its ability to scale. And I never really understood scale until I moved to the United States in 1999. So I come from a small country with 25 million people, and I worked for one of the biggest banks there, and we had 4 million customers. And I thought that was pretty impressive. And then I moved to the US, and I worked for AOL back in the day, and they had 50 million customers. And I thought that was amazing. Like, that was twice the size of the country. And so when you're dealing with the difference between 4 million, an audience of 4 million, and an audience of 50 million, like, you need processes, you need scale, etc. And then I went many, many years later to work for Microsoft. And pretty much everybody has in the world and company in the world has some relationship with Microsoft. So now you're scaling on. So when I was at Microsoft, the thing that was driven into me was, everything you do, how do you scale? And scale means you can't just apply 1 or 2 people to it and be able to service it. You have to think about how I'm going to basically serve everybody in the world. So I apply that to museums. And the reason I do that is because we have massive collections, and they're really interesting collections, but there's so much hidden data. How do you discover that data? And how can you scale creating the discoverability of that data? So traditionally, we've used metadata. Good reasons why. But how can we do that faster? And how can we get lots of different perspectives? And so this is my take on this. And I think this is a great use of AI and it's available today. It's not requiring super sophisticated technology that's been around for a little while. So the idea is, this is a corpus of 34,000 documents, which was released 2018, I think it was, declassified, and it's around the assassination of JFK. So it's 34,000 documents. Now imagine if you needed to read through 34,000 documents. And I appreciate that museums have collections in the millions and the thousands, right? So 34,000 isn't actually even that particularly large. But if someone had to read through that and understand, and then try and make it discoverable, takes a long time and a lot of people. And also, when you think about it, only a few people actually have access to that very, very deep knowledge. So what if you could go beyond metadata? What if you could use technologies that we're even aware of now, OCR, etc., that looks at handwritten documents, that looks at images, that looks at typed documents, that looks at video, that looks at oral histories. There's another great example, oral histories. If you had to listen to hours and hours and hours to understand what was in it, could you scale? No. So take that and then be able to abstract out the entities in this particular case. This is an older technology, but how do you abstract out the entities that are referred to and how they, how numerous they are, right? And then you could apply current technology, current AI technology to not only look at entities, but actually to apply some reasoning over that. So you could say that JFK, for example, was president. So even if it doesn't use the word president, right, it could infer president from that entity, for example. So you can create a mapping of what is the content of this corpus and rapidly be able to explore through what are the key elements, even what are some of the hidden gems. So if we go to that next page, I'll show you another example here, but also any particular entity or concept and how it relates to other entities. So you can imagine that if you can do this, and you can do this at scale, you can do this this particular corpus was done in a couple of weeks, looking at 34,000 documents, analyzing, both looking at the content, analyzing the relationships between that content, and allowing for that serendipitous discovery that we really want in collections. How can I find things that I didn't expect? So when I was at Microsoft, whichever country I was in, and before the pandemic, I got to visit a whole bunch of museums all over the world, which was an amazing experience. Whatever country I was in, I would pick that country and use this to demo. So when I was in Greece, we looked up to find out where there were references to Greece in this corpus of documents around the assassination of JFK. And surprisingly, there was lots of references to Greece that people were amazed about. When I was in Australia, I did the same thing. There were references to Australia. There were references to all sorts of things that you would not expect in this corpus. And that's really one of the things that I really love about collections and the possibilities here with technology is how can I uncover those hidden gems? How can people discover things that they didn't expect and excite them and create those wow moments, what I call wow moments, which is like, wow, I didn't know that, and that gets you interested and stays engaged. So this is an example of just a very simple example that is available today, that's quick, that's easy, that is the other great thing about AI is most of the coding that's done these days is actually prompted by AI. So you actually don't have to be as proficient a coder, for example, to create some of these things. You don't actually even need to code it. There are solutions out there. But regardless, if I go to the next example, we take to a more current technology that you'll be familiar with it, and a great example of what I call these wow moments, which is, how can I help people understand the hidden gems? Because curators cannot scale to tell every story about the collection, right? It's just not possible. So how can we get behind the mainstream? And so I was doing some work with the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. And so I wanted to know a bit more about Theodore Roosevelt. From my time at American Museum of Natural History, they have the New York State memorial to Theodore Roosevelt and a number of those collections. And so I knew a little bit about it, but I wanted to know more. So, and having grown up in Australia, didn't learn the US history. So I was like, what is he known for? And there's a whole bunch of things that he's known for: conservation, national parks. He was president. You will be far more familiar than I am in those. But one of them that surprised me was that he negotiated the end to the Russian-Japanese War. And I was like, what Russian-Japanese War? Didn't know anything about it. In my discussions of this many times, I would say maybe 10% of people are aware of this. Maybe not even that. So that for me was like, if you look at a chat interface, imagine I'm someone visiting a museum. You look at a chat interface, it's like, what is he known for? He's known for that. Well, I didn't know that. How can I find out more? What was the war? So it talks about It happened in 1905 area. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. So I find out more about it. And then I find out, like, what did he do with that? Well, he was involved in all of these things. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm not sure why I didn't know that he didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize, but he didn't. But you can imagine now, you take a visitor online in museum to an educational program, etc. And you're like, you've engaged somebody in something really interesting, and you've allowed for that scaling of deep content in your collection, both to discover that content and then to engage someone in that content. So for me, this is one of the most exciting possibilities. And then when I look at this and I imagine the possibilities in the world, you go beyond one collection into all the collections of a museum, or even all the collections of a country, potentially all the collections of a world even. That's way beyond my lifetime. But imagine all of that hidden content. And then the last thing I want to say on that before we move on is, in a world where you don't know anymore what is real and what is not real, museums are the source of truth. And imagine we make this truthful content, because museums are so focused on that, available, because the world has been trained on the internet. The internet, as we know, is a wild, wild world out there. You cannot necessarily trust what you see on the internet. You can trust what you can see in a museum, generally speaking. And you don't have to just assume that the data is trained on the internet. You can use your own data, your museum's data. You can train it on your own set of data. And I think that's maybe a step beyond where many of us sort of think about the possibilities. So I will get off my soapbox here and allow the rest of the panelists to move on.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Before we do move on to Neal, there is a relevant question in the chat for you. This is from Cara. She said one of the examples that you showed, it looks like there are footnotes and endnotes at the end of the sentence. Which application was this? She hadn't seen examples with provided references before.
Oh yeah, this is a straight ChatGPT. And yeah, I mean, this is Copilot. This is Microsoft Copilot, but you could use anything. And so it's just using internet data. This particular data, the footnotes in this particular case, sourced Britannica.com. So Encyclopedia Britannica.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
A
we've
lot
seen
of the
that
time,
actually.
if you're doing with, oh, go ahead.
Nick. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you're using ChatGPT and you ask it to cite, information that comes back, a lot of times it's going to cite Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Catherine. Neal is going to round us out with how AI is being used in digital asset management.
Well, actually, I'm going to take this moment to just thank both Nick and Catherine for some amazing examples, right? So these are the super exciting things, that come up and what you could do. And somebody asked a question about how would you get started setting up these kind of collections-based chats for it. Our position of it is exactly this: with the combination of dams and collections allows for you to actually start to have a centralized database that you can use to then start to feed these things about your given museum topic or your given a given area that you want to focus on. And so I'm going to go through this briefly because I think there's a lot of really great questions as well, and a bunch more. And we're going to make sure that we have some time to open up the floor for more questions from everybody at the end of this section. And so let's go with it. So we're going to talk about the dam side. So we talked about collections. We'll also talk about dam because we believe that, we believe at Terentia that they need to be more connected than ever. What is the collections data without the assets, and the assets without the collections data, which is why we built a hybrid model for that. And so when we think about this is how can we then use it to then help us with this information to draw out as Catherine would say, whether that be through OCR for documents or for the ability to accelerate that kind of process of tagging things or being able to find and make your media discoverable, which then augment that collections data. Lauren, next slide. With an AI-powered dams, one of the things that we're seeing is how you can help, for example, speed up cataloging, identifying objects, people, text, colors. Now, I do want to say one thing about this, and we're going to be talking about this in section 2, especially when it comes to people in our next week's webinar. And we encourage you all to come back for that one, because then we're going to also talking about, well, what does it mean to actually be tagging a person as it relates to museum policies? both from an archiving policy, but also for people like events or that may be attending. And what does that mean for you to be doing things like that? But how can it also help generate image descriptions or alt tags, for example, based on the image? What's really important, though, in a firm belief that we have at Terentia, if you go to the next slide, Lauren, is that we believe that it should not be just left to the bots. We believe for this part where it's still involved with the cataloging to being able to come up with somebody that is, or come up with the information appropriately. We want them to be able to check off what there is actually valid and what's not. As Nick said before, there's still a lot of hallucinations going on, and so there's still not a lot of great data sources for it. What we found works really well is scientific information, animals, species, dinosaurs, stuff like that. We've experimented with some of the AI off the shelf, and even things like the Mona Lisa comes back just as a person. It doesn't identify that. So the need to be able to create these databases and have your own models that you can use start to grow and grow and grow. Next slide. This continues not just in the images, but also how do we do this for things like unstructured content or videos to make them searchable. So being able to do extraction of the information so that you're able to get automatic transcriptions that you could then use to update and edit to make available for just accessibility. So it accelerates that pattern through for it. Or how can we extract text from the images and the PDFs? Handwriting's a big one. Catherine, you talked about it, right, with the JFK papers. Same with the presidential library, that Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. We're honored to be working with them and the King Center, where we have the King papers. There is a lot of handwriting. So we're doing a lot of work on how do we do better analysis of the handwriting in order to create those transcripts a lot better. If we go on to that next slide, it can also help you with interesting things that you might not have seen. Emotions, what else is it talking about? Topics. So instead of us just having to curate, to listen to everything and make all of those decisions, it can help advise you as a person who's starting to describe this type of object or what's being told in an oral history, allowing you to have that enhancement to say, oh, there's a topic I didn't realize that they were doing, and maybe connecting it to others. Again, I do want to highlight, you'll see here with facial identification, identifying that, is definitely a GDPR related, as somebody pointed out, Allison, when it comes to employees or things. There's different rules that they apply. It's interesting when it comes to an archive. And I think those are some of the things that we're going to explore next week. But it's also about knowing where your data is going on that. So that it's not just being given to everybody all the time, but instead making sure that the provider of technology that you're working with, you're aware of where that data goes. When you say that's Nick or that's Catherine or that's Alex, where's that data going has become very important for us to be thinking about as well. Next slide. When it comes to using that, it then comes down to how can we get context aware searching for better accuracy? Today, searching has really always been thought about what is it that you know. You're searching for the term that you think is associated to maybe that object or to that asset, but instead, what does it mean to now get context aware searching so that it's suggesting what you're looking for? Instead, this allows us to really move from search into discovery, because how big are some of our archives or some of our collections of information where we actually don't know what's in there? And so can we utilize these kind of tools to help us get enriched search results, document snippets that come up, video content, and all of its related entries? And these are things that we are actively working on all the time as we're advancing Terentia when we think about discoverability of content. And just as importantly, how can we then use that content to feed digital exhibitions, to feed GPT models, to feed research and things like that you're trying to do in your cultural institution. Next slide, Laura. Also, how can we think about streamlining it? And Catherine, you talked about this right away. We have a client that has over 1.4 million documents and 500,000 minutes of video, and I think it's 700,000 images. And that's a lot for a person to sit and try and tag. Almost impossible at times, let's be honest. And so how can we use what we call smart linking by building relationships automatically that are suggested? so that people can then look and validate whether or not. How can we make sure that our systems and technology are denoting when an AI has done this connection versus a human has validated that connection? I think these are really important things that we should be looking at with our suppliers of technology. To some of the questions earlier, how do you denote whether or not it's AI generated or not? I think these are things that are really important that our systems need to do. And then how do we also help it with supplying it with data models to improve future imports of information? Again, next week, we're going to be talking about some of the cultural bias that has come into AI. And that's because we're not feeding our AI tools with enough information about other cultures, or other communities that we need to be in order to become well-rounded, just like a lot of us as well-rounded, educated people that are on this call today. Next slide. All right, Alex, I think we're coming back to you. There's a lot of really great questions, and we will get to those, by the way. We're super excited. I can't believe the amount of you that are joining in on this conversation today. And we're really honored to be doing this all with you today. Alex?
Yes, thank you, Neal, Nick, and Catherine. I'm going to go ahead and launch our last poll for today. Okay, give everybody a chance a minute to respond. Following the poll, we will jump into Q&A. Very cool. I see a lot of people are exploring. We have a lot of great questions too, Neal. So I'll save the ones that I put together for last. All right. It looks like everybody has responded. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And we're going to jump into Q&A now. All right, so I've pulled quite a few questions from the chat. I'm going to read them in the order that I received them. First question, for those who use AI as a tool for interpretation or exhibit text, how do you provide fail-safe for plagiarism?
Great question.
That's a great question, yes.
So
Nick, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way it's been using it right now, I mean, it's a problem if you're using it like in that kind of AI driven where it's kind of working autonomously, because it is going to pull from the internet. It's probably not, it might be hard to detect plagiarism, because if you query a large language model, and then increasingly it will cite its references, but it's unlikely to pull something very specific. You know, it often, even if you ask it to pull specific things, it doesn't get them right. But, you know, if you, I think the Association of Art Museum Curators had at their last conference, they had a legal person who's been embedded in AI for a long time. And he basically said, you know, the product of AI, if you look at the terms and conditions, is it's owned by everybody. You know, it's because the data set is coming from the entire internet. It is putting it together and kind of massaging and delivering something to you. It's very hard to claim kind of ownership of that. So if you create an image through DALL-E, for example, you don't own it. It's public ownership.
It's almost like the gorilla who took its own picture and who ended up owning it, right? I'm not sure where that case ended up, but you know, Nick and Catherine, you said it really good about ChatGPT. I mean, if I was to kind of predict or make a statement, it's if 2024 was about ChatGPT, which was accessing the whole internet, I think 2025 is going to be the rise of my GPT or curated GPTs. Right. And I think that's where we need to get to. ChatGPT was a really great way for us to understand the art of the possible. Now what we need to do is think about how do we make sure that it's given appropriate information or curated information, so that things like the best way to make sure the pepperoni doesn't fall off the pizza being glue from that one Reddit post that we probably all saw, this the big thing that ChatGPT talked about doesn't sneak in. And that's what we have to do. Is just like our collections, we got to curate them. And I think to answer your question about plagiarism, we need to be able to think about where this data is coming from and make sure they're from great sources. And how do we aggregate all these really great sources that are available? Catherine?
I think,
Yeah, I think whilst I agree, Nick, that you can claim ownership, you never want the look of potentially being exposed as plagiarizing something. So I think museums would want to protect against that. I'm not an expert on this topic, but I know that this is a real issue for teachers and education, and so I know that there are applications in education that are looking for plagiarism. Um, but I would also absolutely agree with Neal. We often look, I mean, going back to something that I said at the beginning, we often look at the first instantiation of a technology and assume that it will always be that way. And and so, yeah, large language models were trained on the internet because it was available data and it was public data, right? It doesn't need to be that way. And it doesn't, I mean, going forward, we would probably want, let's also look at, it's going to be modern English, right? We may want, depending on our museums, to reflect a different type of language, English or whichever is the language of your country. But you want to perfect but maybe a more academic language, maybe something different. And you can absolutely do that with your own collections, which is why museums have been on yes, Icelandic, lovely. I just saw that come through in the chat. The museums have been focused on how can we make our data more open and more accessible. And this is one way to do it. More museums do it. It means that we can train on that data. And that data, either within your own organization or against a collaboration of organizations, that data allows you to have less concern about that. I will also add, though, because I talked about mathematics at scale, whatever exists, we're going to talk about this more about this next week, whatever exists in your data collection, whether it's been some conversation around decolonization, around, all data is biased for one reason or another, and it's going to magnify that bias regardless, for good or bad. And we need to be aware of that. We're going to talk more about that next week. It's not a reason not to do it, but it's absolutely essential to be aware. So even in your own collections, you're going to be magnifying whatever that is.
Thank you. Okay, we have quite a few questions. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to all of
I
them
was going to say,
today.
we may need a session just on questions at some point.
I'm gonna
for
try and combine a couple of these because there's quite a few that are more around, evaluating the results that you get from ChatGPT as an example. Were the examples that you provided evaluated post-implementation was one of the questions. Another question was, how do you implement, quality control?
I
Who
think
wants to jump
that's,
on that?
the reason I kind of talked about those three kind of layers of really maturity is you kind of need to get familiar with it. So that kind of first level, you're just using it's mostly human, but you're using AI to give you kind of a baseline of information, and then you're interacting on it. That second level, you're relying on it a bit more to interact, to create things that you are then evaluating. And then the kind of at the far right, much more mature, it's working autonomously. You really have to make sure that you've done the work to put in the guardrails to ensure that when it's out there kind of unleashed on the public, that it isn't going to do some crazy things. But I think it's, if you had processes, it's no different than I'm assuming your current processes and QA control in your institutions right now, right? You're just applying it to working with something that may be a little more hallucinatory.
that, or if you're going to decide to allow the AI to be able to interact with the public, if you will, or to be able to generate things to the public, then what you should probably be doing is making sure it's very clear to the public that this is AI and has not been QA'd by a human. And that's, I think, the real trend that you're going to start to see is there's a lot of people using ChatGPT, as we see it all the time on LinkedIn posts and stuff like that. I think it's going to be, you're going to see an alternate where it's like this was generated by ChatGPT. And really quickly, somebody asked what is hallucinations or hallucinatory. It's actually the term that we've been given for when it just goes off into a weird state of saying some things that aren't actually accurate, or it's making kind of assumptions about things. I think it might be a good way to describe it. Catherine, would you call hallucination something like that, where the
Yeah,
AI bot
it's
just
what. Yeah, I mean, it's where it's coming up with things that actually don't exist at all.
yeah.
It's not saying that it's not the mainstream experience, but it happens, and it's representative of a new and an emerging technology. Those things need to time for organizations, not organizations, technology companies to work out. As with all technology, all new technologies, they have challenges at the beginning.
Yeah.
Alex, I want to make sure there's been a lot of conversation around environmental impact.
I was
Maybe you're
actually
going to get to
just
that.
going to bring that up. Yes. That was going to be the next question that I made. So
It sounds like Catherine wants to answer it.
yes, there's been some really great chatter in the chat about environmental impacts. So how do you balance the usefulness of AI with those impacts, particularly if your organization places an importance on environmental, sustainability, preservation, things like that?
Yeah. Yes, I'd love to answer. Maybe Nick does as well, but I'll try and be brief. It's absolutely critical. I will say that all new innovation in the world has had an environmental impact. That is not necessarily a good thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, and let me explain why. The Industrial Revolution had tremendous environmental impact, and it has only got worse as time goes on. However, it's also brought many benefits to society, and also it has brought many downsides to society. That is true of all innovation. I will say that from my time at Microsoft, and I'm only speaking for Microsoft here, that they have been very focused on the fact that these require huge data centers and huge potential environmental impact. And Microsoft made a pledge a couple of years ago when I was there to be carbon negative by 2030. And they are well on their way to do that. That means that carbon negative to them means that they have no additional impact on the environment. And they've also paid back all of the impact that they've had over the 50 years of their life. I can't share the details, but I will tell you that I was involved in many conversations around how Microsoft is looking at minimizing its impact on the environment. And so I think it's a way. I'm not saying that all technology companies are great or perfect or everything. It's absolutely something that they should be focused on. I hope that more and probably are focused on. But absolutely, it's a part of the conversation. There is many conversations to be had about AI, and in fact, any emerging technology. There's many
Catherine,
conversations to be had. Yeah.
yeah, I want to jump in on this because we, as you well know, we are a Microsoft, a partner. And the reason why we chose Microsoft in Azure specifically, I'll just use one small part that's publicly available is the database.
Yeah.
So, for the most part, nobody inside the museum may be using the database from, let's say, 7 p.m. till 5 a.m. the next day, Monday through Friday. Using Microsoft Azure, you can actually turn the database effectively off and then therefore not using power and consumption during that time and turn it back on. Most of us with our traditional technology would never dare to turn the database off inside of your organization. You keep it on and it's running 24/7 all of the time. There's a lot of discussion and debate that could be held about the environmental. I think it's a good one and definitely one that we should talk about in a future webinar series when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
AI and cloud and these kind of things that come with it. I'm also seeing just a ton of stuff on policy for those who are still there. That's why we created section 2 of this webinar series, all about policy. And I think one of the funny things I'll say as a thing about it is, should you be using AI to help generate your museum policy on AI? Is one of the things to think about. We're even seeing AI conferences where they're not allowing AI generated proposals to actually be submitted to the conferences. So it's one of those things I think we can talk about as well next week.
All right.
Alex?
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
One
Yeah.
5-second comment on environmental. If you look at the NFT marketplace and mining as an example, there has been a significant emergence of eco-friendly NFT rendering farms, and I think you'll see the same thing because people will vote with
Absolutely.
their feet.
All
Yeah,
right.
green technologies are only skyrocketing, right? So these types of
Right.
innovations cause those temporary, things to happen, and then we immediately get into how are we going to get better about it all the time.
As you can see, we have so much to talk about. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap. I want to thank all of our speakers and our audience, of course, for participating. Thank you so much for contributing to the polls. AI is a powerful tool, but its true potential lies in how we apply it thoughtfully and ethically to enrich the museum experience. A recording of this webinar will be available on the Terentia website and our YouTube channel shortly. Don't forget to join us for our next webinar next week. We will dive more into AI ethics, cultural sensitivity, data privacy, policies. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.